On a crisp autumn morning, in 1999, 9-year-old Emily Holt vanished from the hall outside her fourth-grade classroom, last seen wearing a red cardigan for school picture day. No body, no witnesses, no answers. Then, a quarter-century later, her class photo turns up inside a dead man's wallet. The morning sun filtered in through the lace curtains, casting soft patterns across the floral wallpaper of the Holt family's modest kitchen. Emily sat on a stool near the window, legs swinging above the linoleum floor, a slight pout forming on her freckled face. Her mother, Marlene, stood behind her with a brush in hand, gently tugging through the knots in Emily's thick brown hair. Every so often, Emily would wince and Marlene would murmur an apology, more preoccupied than usual. "Picture day," Emily mumbled, clutching the sleeves of her favorite red cardigan, the one with the heart-shaped buttons. She had picked it out the night before, laying it carefully on the foot of her bed like it was some sacred costume. She wore it now with quiet reverence, brushing invisible lint from the sleeves. "Can they Photoshop my tooth in?" Marlene chuckled, though it was thin. "I don't think they can, sweet pea, but your smile's perfect just the way it is." Emily didn't look convinced. She pressed her tongue through the gap where her front tooth had once been, already feeling the sting of teasing she was sure to get from Mikey Dunlap, who always sat in front of her during assemblies and flicked paper balls at her ponytail. "I could keep my mouth closed," she offered, practicing a tight-lipped smile in the reflection of the toaster. "Like this, serious, like I'm in the army." Marlene looked down at her daughter's reflection, eyes softening. There was always something heartbreaking about picture day. These little pauses in childhood that tried to capture a moment, yet always fell short of the truth. They never showed the missing teeth, or the anxiety, or how a girl's smile shifted when she started to notice boys were looking, or not looking. "Let's just be you today," Marlene said, tucking a stray strand of hair behind Emily's ear. "Gap tooth and all." Emily nodded, and though her smile didn't return, she squeezed her mother's hand. Then she hopped off the stool and adjusted her cardigan one last time. "I want the picture to be perfect," she whispered. "So, when I'm a grown-up, I'll remember exactly how I felt today." Marlene watched her daughter walk toward the door, lunchbox swinging in rhythm with her steps. She had no idea it would be the last time she ever saw her child walk out into the world. No idea that the next photo of Emily would not be taken at school, nor framed on the mantel, but found decades later in the wallet of a dead stranger. The halls of Delridge Elementary buzzed with a nervous energy that only picture day could bring. Children whispered excitedly in uneven lines, smoothing their shirts and straightening collars, waiting to be called in one by one to the library where the portable backdrop and tripod were already set up. Teachers tried to maintain order with smiles that stretched thin, counting heads and coaxing squirming children into stillness. Mrs. Latimer, Emily's fourth-grade teacher, clutched her clipboard as she made another head count, mentally checking off names. "Emily?" she asked, turning slightly to scan the cluster of students near the coat racks. "Has anyone seen Emily Holt?" "Bathroom," one of the girls mumbled, barely looking up from braiding her friend's hair. Mrs. Latimer nodded, distracted. The line was moving fast now, and she was already down to the final 5 students. It wasn't unusual for someone to slip away for a quick break, especially on a morning like this. Emily would be back in a minute or two, she was sure. Except she wasn't. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. By the time the photographer was packing up his lenses and folding the backdrop, Mrs. Latimer's smile had turned brittle. She checked the hallway again, calling Emily's name a little louder. A few students turned to look, curiosity briefly piqued, but no one offered anything helpful. Another teacher walked by, and Mrs. Latimer stopped her. "Have you seen one of mine? Emily Holt. She went to the bathroom 20 minutes ago and hasn't come back." "No," the teacher said with a slight frown. "Try the nurse?" Mrs. Latimer checked the nurse's office. Nothing. She checked the front office, the playground, the cafeteria, nothing. She returned to her classroom, pale now. Her students were seated, whispering among themselves, sensing something was wrong. Mrs. Latimer stepped outside and found the principal already walking toward her, his face tight. "Is there a problem?" he asked. "I can't find Emily," she said. She never came back. The intercom buzzed minutes later. A calm but firm voice asked all teachers to check their classrooms and report any missing students. Doors opened up and down the corridor. Custodians were dispatched. Secretary started calling parents. The photographer was stopped in the parking lot and questioned. Within the hour, the police were there. Emily's mother arrived breathless, her cardigan still covered in flour from the cookie dough she'd been rolling when the call came. She ran to the office, already shouting Emily's name before she'd cleared the front doors. But the only response was silence. A growing, suffocating silence that would never lift. Somewhere between the classroom and the bathroom, Emily Holt had disappeared. The first lockdown in Delridge Elementary's history began with a click of the front doors and the low hum of confusion spreading down the halls. Sirens weren't used. Not yet. But the sense that something was wrong clung to the air like a sudden change in pressure before a storm. Teachers closed classroom doors with quiet urgency. Students were told to sit, not speak, stay calm. Outside, squad cars lined the curb. Officers moved swiftly, some questioning faculty, others checking exits, closets, storage rooms. The principal, red-faced and shaking, stood by the main entrance giving statements he barely believed himself. "She was here just an hour ago," he kept repeating, as though the truth might rearrange itself if he said it enough. In the library, the portable photography station still stood half-assembled. The backdrop was a printed blue swirl, meant to resemble sky, but now it hung off-center like a torn veil. The camera had been unplugged in the hurry, its stand left crooked. A small table beside it still held the list of student names, each checkmark beside a number. Emily Holt's row was blank. At some point, no one could agree exactly when the school secretary, Mrs. Kemp, noticed something else. She was the one who had ordered the composites from the photography company each year. She had gone to the front office filing cabinet to review which shots were already logged for each class. She expected Emily's image to be missing, of course. But what she didn't expect was the absence of something else. The original group composite layout, usually printed for proofing, had been returned already, but with one square missing. In the fourth grade class composite, a perfect grid of faces smiled beneath names typed in Comic Sans, all 24 students accounted for. Except in the middle row, there was an empty gray square, like a dead tooth in a row of smiles. No name, no placeholder, just gone. "That spot was hers," Mrs. Kemp whispered, tracing her finger over the empty space. A photographer from Lensmark Studios confirmed it later. He remembered setting the layout. Every child had been assigned a position based on seating charts. He swore Emily had been scheduled, her name entered, her square aligned. But now, that square was just missing. Not grayed out, not marked, absent, removed entirely, as though she'd never existed. It was the first and only time in Lensmark's history that a scheduled student's photo vanished from a composite proof. And no one ever found the negative. Delridge had always been the kind of town where people left their doors unlocked and let their kids ride their bikes until dusk. Where the postman knew every dog by name and the bakery wrote birthday wishes in frosting on the house. But after Emily disappeared, a sickness took hold on that no one could name but everyone could feel. It festered in glances, exchanged at grocery stores, in whispered conversations behind half-closed blinds, in the way neighbors suddenly forgot how to smile at each other in the morning. At first, the community pulled together. Volunteers in neon vests combed the wooded trails behind the school. Farmers brought search dogs. Retirees printed missing posters. Parents delivered coffee and casseroles to the Holt family doorstep. But as days passed with no sign, no lead, no clue, the unity began to unravel. The whispers started in the pews of St. Agnes during Sunday service. Some said it was someone at the school. Others murmured that a stranger must have passed through, a drifter, a trucker, someone just sick enough to wait outside the girls' bathroom. Then the fingers turned inward. People began asking questions they hadn't dared voice aloud. Hadn't the janitor seemed a little too quiet? Wasn't the photographer new that year? What about that substitute librarian? What was her name? Helen something? No one had seen her since October. Even friends started looking sideways at each other. A mother stopped letting her daughter sleep over at her best friend's house. The Cub Scout troop paused their weekly meetings. A father refused to let his kids take the school bus, opting instead to drive them to and from class, engine idling at the curb like a shield. The Holt family, once at the center of block parties and potlucks, became ghosts in their own home. Sarah Holt rarely left the house. Greg stopped going to work entirely. The shutters stayed closed, and the porch light burned day and night. When strangers left baked goods on the steps, they stayed untouched until raccoons got to them. Delridge, a town built on shared trust, was now built on suspicion. Parents stopped waving to teachers. The friendly postman found his hellos, met with locked doors. Every adult became a maybe. And beneath it all, the silence that Emily left behind kept spreading, as if the town had inhaled it the day she vanished and forgot how to breathe out. The camera crews parked outside their house like vultures waiting for something to die. Satellite vans lined the curb, their antennas rising like skeletal arms into the gray sky. Reporters took turns knocking, calling out softly through the screen door, pretending sympathy. "We're just trying to help, Mrs. Holt," they would say, as if sticking a microphone under her chin might summon her daughter home. Sarah stopped answering the door after the first week. She drew the curtains tight, unplugged the landline, and lived in a quiet that felt more like a tomb than a sanctuary. The only noise came from the news loops that Greg wouldn't turn off reruns of the same clips, the same headlines: "Local girl vanishes on picture day." Fourth, grader disappears without a trace. Parents under scrutiny as search continues. Greg watched those segments with his arms folded and his jaw clenched, memorizing every word. He studied his own body language in the interviews they'd given in the early days, the way he looked off camera, the nervous twitch of his knee. "They're painting us," he said once, pointing at the screen. "Making us look wrong, like we're not devastated enough." Sarah didn't respond. She just stared at the flickering images of herself from 2 weeks ago, eyes red, voice shaking, hands clenched in her lap like she was trying to hold something in, or keep something out. They were questioned more than once. It started gently. The police came with notebooks and sympathetic eyes. But as the days dragged on, the tone shifted. Had Emily seemed withdrawn? Did she ever mention anything unusual? Did she run away before? "How was your marriage?" It was that last question that cracked something open. They had been drifting apart even before the disappearance. Sarah had taken to sleeping in the guest room, citing Greg's snoring but meaning something else entirely. Greg had begun staying late at work, sometimes not coming home until the early morning hours. Emily had noticed, of course. She'd ask questions. "Why doesn't Daddy eat dinner with us anymore?" Sarah didn't have answers then, and she had even fewer now. After Emily vanished, the silence between them thickened. Grief filled the rooms, pushing them to opposite ends of the house like magnets turned the wrong way. Conversations became brief, functional. Arguments burst forth without warning, like steam from a cracked pipe. One night, after another day of dead ends and pitying glances, Greg stood in the doorway of Emily's room, untouched since she left it, and said, "I don't think we know each other anymore." Sarah didn't look up from the floor. "We don't," she said. "But we did. She was the piece that held us together." Neither of them disagreed. Neither of them moved. And the house stayed quiet, except for the hum of television static and the echo of a child who was no longer there. The rain came down in sheets the night the sedan skidded off Highway 23, veering hard into a drainage ditch and crumpling like paper around a rusted culvert. By the time the troopers arrived, the engine was still hissing steam and the windshield had spiderwebbed into a dozen fractures. The driver, a middle-aged man with gray stubble and a once-black jacket soaked through, was already dead-neck broken on impact. No other vehicles involved, no sign of braking. Just a long black streak of tread on wet asphalt, and then nothing. Detective Mara Raines stood on the shoulder, the weight of a long night already pressing into her spine. She was only supposed to assist routine death, no foul play suspected. But something about the scene pulled at her. The man's hands were bruised but clean, no tattoos, no jewelry. His wallet was thin, a battered leather fold with no license, no credit cards, not even a bus pass. Just cash And one photo. It was folded neatly, crisp along the edges, as though it had been handled carefully for years. Mara opened it beneath the glow of her flashlight. The image was a school photo composite from the late 90s, rows of young faces smiling beneath their names, the telltale soft focus background that defined an era. But what caught her attention wasn't the style. It was the fact that one square in the center row was outlined in red ink, drawn with a shaky but deliberate hand. A face had once occupied the space but was now cut out, a precise scalpel-edged rectangle removed so cleanly it left no tear. Mara stared at the void. Beneath the missing square, a name still remained: Emily Holt. She lowered the photo and looked again at the man slumped in the front seat, airbag deflated across his chest, eyes wide and vacant. His expression seemed frozen in something beyond pain. Recognition, maybe. Or regret. Later, when the vehicle was towed and the autopsy scheduled, Mara returned to her office and typed the name into the state missing persons database. The file opened with a single click. Emily Holt, missing since October 14, 1999, last seen at Delridge Elementary School, age 9. A cold knot twisted in her stomach as she looked back at the faded photo in her hand. The man in the ditch had no identity. But the girl he carried with him? She'd been missing for 25 years. Detective Mara Raines spread the photograph across her desk like a map, careful not to crease it further. The ink had bled slightly over the years, but the red circle drawn around the missing face was still sharp enough to raise the hairs on her arms. The composite showed 24 children frozen in time, all awkward grins and crooked teeth, some clearly coached by parents, others caught mid-blink or mid-laugh. It was dated Fall 1999, Delridge Elementary, Grade 4B. 25 names, 25 tiny printed labels beneath the faces. But only 24 children. The missing square had been cut out with surgical precision. No ragged edges, no tear marks. Not like a child ripping out their own picture for a scrapbook. This was deliberate. Controlled, as if someone had removed a memory they couldn't bear to carry, or couldn't risk leaving behind. Mara traced her finger across the names, mouthing each one until she reached the empty space. Emily Holt, the only child still marked missing in the case files from that year. Still technically a cold case. Still technically unresolved. But something was wrong. She leaned closer to study the photo again. The red circle, that was what puzzled her. It wasn't drawn around Emily's missing square. No, it was a different girl entirely. Third row from the top, second from the left, pale, with unusually dark eyes. Hair pulled into a severe ponytail, lips pressed together in a closed-mouth smile that looked rehearsed. There was no name beneath her photo. Where a label should have been, there was only a gray smear, like someone had wiped it away with a thumb before the ink dried. Mara's eyes narrowed. She cross-referenced the names with the official class roster she'd pulled from the Delridge School archives. Every name matched a face except for one. The circled girl wasn't on the list at all. She wasn't in the school directory, not in the attendance books, not in any of the teachers' logs from that year. Whoever she was, the school had no record of her ever existing. And yet, there she was, smiling faintly, captured forever, and marked in red by a dead man's hand. Mara sat back, her stomach coiling, because she had the chilling feeling that this forgotten face wasn't just missing from the system, it was missing on purpose. Someone had gone to great lengths to erase her. But someone else had made sure she wouldn't be forgotten. The town of Delridge looked like it had given up trying. Paint peeled in strips from old storefronts that hadn't seen business in years. The once bustling diner stood with its windows boarded, a faded, "Open 7 days" sign dangling crookedly from a rusted chain. The gas station had one pump still working, and the clerk inside didn't look up when Mara pushed through the door. She hadn't been here before, not during the original investigation, but the case files had painted a picture of a tight-knit town torn open like a wound, then stitched shut with silence. She held the photograph in her coat pocket as she stepped into the library, the same building that once doubled as the school's temporary office after the expansion. A woman behind the desk glanced up. Late 50s, maybe. Stringy gray hair tucked behind her ears, her name tag read June. "Afternoon," Mara said. "I'm looking into an old missing person case. Emily Holt. Disappeared back in '99. June's hands, mid-motion stacking returned books, froze. For a second she didn't move, didn't blink. Then, very slowly, she turned to the computer, typed something with unnecessary focus, and said, "You'll want to talk to someone at the sheriff's office." "I've already been," Mara said gently, "just following up on some local records." "She's gone," June muttered without looking up. "Nothing to find now." "I think someone kept something," Mara replied, pulling out the photo and setting it lightly on the desk. June's eyes flickered to the image. She stared at it for a moment too long, like it hurt to look at, then shook her head with an abruptness that felt like fear. "That's not right. That photo, that's not the one they printed." Mara leaned in. "You remember it?" "Of course I do," June snapped, then caught herself. "I had a son in that class, Tommy. He's in the second row." She pointed without touching the paper. "But that girl, the one with the ponytail, no one ever knew her name. She was in the photo but not in the classroom." Mara's pulse quickened. "She didn't go to school here?" "Not officially," June said, her voice lower now. "People said she was a cousin visiting, or a foster kid, but nobody ever saw her again after that day." "And Emily?" The librarian's face hardened. "Don't ask about her here," she said quietly. "People went mad over that girl. Lives were ruined, families split, the town nearly tore itself apart looking for her." Mara folded the photo carefully and slid it back into her coat. She didn't need to ask more. The silence in Delridge said everything. Emily Holt was still a ghost here, and ghosts made people forget how to speak. The east wing of Delridge Elementary was a ghost limb, long amputated from the school's daily rhythm. Once intended as an expansion for a growing town that never quite grew, it had stood shuttered for over 2 decades, windows dark, its doors locked from the inside, its hallway swallowed by silence and dust. Mara found Hank Delaney seated on a bench outside the senior center, feeding stale crusts of white bread to a pair of seagulls that clearly didn't belong this far inland. He wore a faded maintenance jacket with the district's logo stitched over the heart and a baseball cap so sun-bleached it was almost colorless. "You were the janitor at Delridge back in '99, right?" she asked, easing down onto the bench beside him. Hank didn't look at her at first. He tossed another crust to the birds. "I was there long before that, 31 years total. I remember when that school still smelled like wax and fresh chalk." She waited, let the silence settle. "Emily Holt," she said. He stiffened, just barely. "You another reporter?" "Detective, cold case unit. I'm revisiting some evidence." He leaned back with a slow, creaky breath. "Thought they gave up long ago." "I think someone used the school that day in a way no one realized. Maybe even a space that hadn't been touched in years." That got his attention. He glanced at her now, eyes sharp behind fogged lenses. "You're talking about the East Wing." "I read. It was sealed off. Mostly, but not picture day." Mara turned toward him. "Why?" "They needed extra space. Always did. Set up one of the photography backdrops in the old art room, big windows, natural light. The company wanted it. Said it gave the portraits a softer look. Administration agreed just for the day." "Who had access?" "Just the photographer's crew and me. I unlocked it that morning. Cleaned it out the night before. After that, it stayed shut for good. We nailed the door shut 2 weeks later." Mara scribbled a note. "Did you see anyone unusual? Anyone not on staff?" He hesitated, pulling a crust in half. "There was a man, not the main photographer. His assistant, supposedly. Carried his own camera, walked around like he belonged there. I remember, he didn't wear a badge." "Could he have taken kids in alone?" "I didn't think much of it then, just another helper." Mara's voice dropped. "What if that room was the last place Emily was seen?" Hank blinked slowly. Then we boarded up a memory no one wanted to remember. And the door they nailed shut might have hidden more than just dust. The district archive office was a time capsule wrapped in mildew and red tape. Boxes were stacked like tombstones, each marked in fading Sharpie. Attendance 97-2001, lunch menus, staff payroll. In the corner, a battered metal filing cabinet bore a crooked label that read security logs, tapes. That's where Mara dug for answers under the watchful eye of a clerk who seemed irritated that anyone had unearthed this room at all. Most of the old schools in the county hadn't used video surveillance back then. But Delridge Elementary had installed a few grainy hallway cameras after a string of petty thefts. The system had been rudimentary motion-triggered, time-stamped, and stored on VHS tapes, rotated out weekly. Mara found the logs confirming cameras were active in October 1999. One tape should have covered the day Emily Holt disappeared. Only, it wasn't there. Tape, 42 marked Oct 1014, was missing. Mara checked the sign-out sheet attached to the file. Her pen hovered as she read the name written in smudged cursive, Thomas P. Greeley. Date accessed, October 15, 1999. 7:42 a.m. Just one day after Emily vanished. Greeley had been the assistant principal back then, retired now, a few mentions of his name in early reports. He had conducted the parent meetings, liaised with police, even given statements to the local paper expressing heartbreak and disbelief. Now, over 2 decades later, his signature sat quietly next to the missing tape like a secret hiding in plain sight. Mara requested the personnel files. Greeley's employment ended in June 2000. Early retirement. No explanation. Back in her car, she pulled up his address. He still lived in Delridge, tucked in a modest house near the outskirts of town. As she sat behind the wheel, engine idling, her mind kept circling back to that timestamp. 7:42 a.m. Not during the chaos. Not as part of the investigation. Early, quiet, intentional. He had walked into that building less than 24 hours after Emily vanished and removed the one piece of footage that might have shown where she went, who she went with, whether she went at all. The next tape, 43, picked up with the day after the library, the parking lot, teachers drinking coffee. But there was no Emily, no hallway, no goodbye. And nobody had ever asked why. Until now. The retirement home sat on the edge of town like a forgotten postcard, its paint sun-bleached, its garden overgrown. Inside, the air was warm and heavy, with the scent of antiseptic and stale coffee. Mara signed in, tucked the photo into her folder, and followed the nurse down a narrow hallway toward room 112. Helen Stratton had taught 4th grade at Delridge for over 20 years. Her cursive still lingered in the margins of old report cards, gentle, looping letters praising effort and neat handwriting. She'd retired a year after Emily vanished, citing stress and personal strain. Now she was 81 and fading. Helen was seated in a chair by the window, staring out at a bird feeder swaying in the wind. When Mara introduced herself, the old woman turned slowly, confusion clouding her eyes, until something familiar flickered in the mention of Emily's name. She had the gap, Helen said, almost smiling. Always giggling about it, said she looked like a jack-o'-lantern. Mara took a seat across from her. Do you remember what happened on picture day? Helen frowned, the smile vanishing. She tugged nervously at the edge of her cardigan sleeve. We lined them up, alphabetical. That's how it always was. Mara laid the class photo between them. Helen's hands hovered over it, like she was afraid to touch it. Then, carefully, she tapped her index finger on the empty square. She was there. She was supposed to be there. What happened? Mara asked softly. The old woman's brow furrowed. He insisted. Mara leaned in. Who? The assistant. Not the main photographer. The other one. Said he needed her alone. Better lighting. Something about shadows. She said it with the offhanded certainty of someone repeating something they'd believed once, and then buried. I let him. Just for a moment. We were behind schedule. Her voice cracked. She trusted me. Mara swallowed hard. Do you remember his name? Helen shook her head, slowly. No badge, no clipboard. Just eyes that didn't blink enough, you know? And you let her go? She was only gone a few minutes, Helen said, her voice growing small. I told myself that for years. Mara stared at her. Did you tell anyone back then? Helen's eyes welled. No one asked. Not really. And by the time I thought to say it, she was already gone. Outside, a bird landed on the feeder and flew off again, and the empty square on the photo stayed silent. Mara sat in the cramped, fluorescent-lit office of Lensmark Studios' regional headquarters, surrounded by boxes of outdated equipment and framed memories. Old class photos hung on every wall, smiling faces, glossy composites, captured moments frozen in the manufactured perfection of school picture day. It was a business built on nostalgia, but Mara wasn't here for the memories. The manager, a soft-spoken man in his early 60s named Dennis Lake, adjusted his glasses as he pulled a dusty binder from a cabinet marked 1,999 contracts, assignments. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the yellowed pages, pausing only when he reached the week of October 10th. There, he said, pointing. Delridge Elementary. Photographer assigned, Glenn Wilcox. He worked with us full-time for 8 years, retired in 2006. Lives out in Spokane now. Was he working alone? Mara asked. Lake hesitated, flipping the page. Says here. Assistant, D. Miller. Miller? Mara leaned forward. First name? He flipped again, frowned. It's just initials. No personnel ID number. No tax form on file. That's unusual. Unusual enough to raise concern? Dennis looked embarrassed. Back then, we sometimes subcontracted through temp agencies for extra hands during peak season. Busy weeks, double bookings, we didn't ask many questions as long as the work got done. Which agency? Another pause. We use 3 or 4, some don't even exist anymore. Fly-by-nights, quick hires for low pay. Mara pulled out the photo from her folder and laid it flat on the table between them. Do you recognize him? She pointed to the small figure in the back row, a man half visible behind the setup, caught in the edge of the frame, out of focus, a clipboard in one hand, a camera strap around his neck. Lake stared at it, blinking. That might be him. I'm not sure. That wasn't a staff shot, it must have been taken by accident. Mara folded the photo slowly. There's no tax records, no timesheet, no name beyond D. Miller. Nothing? Lake nodded grimly. Nothing that would hold up. Then, how did he even get in? She murmured. Lake exhaled. He probably walked through the door, smiled, said he was with you, Sand. No one questioned it. Mara stood up. The silence that followed felt like guilt baked into the drywall. One man. No trace. A borrowed name. And a little girl never seen again. The coffee shop where they met was quiet, nestled in the corner of a neighborhood that had grown up without them. It smelled of cinnamon and burnt espresso, the kind of place where no one asked questions if someone cried over their drink. Mara waited near the window, hands wrapped around a paper cup gone cold, when the door chimed and in walked a woman with tired eyes and the kind of posture that belonged to someone who carried other people's pain for a living. Her name was Rachel Cross now. In 1999, she was Rachel Simmons, Emily Holt's best friend, seatmate, playground partner, and the last person to share a secret with her before she vanished. She slid into the booth across from Mara, no coat, sleeves pushed up, a faded tattoo on her wrist that said Grace in tiny cursive. You said this was about Emily, Rachel said. No small talk. Just the weight of that name dropped like an anchor. Mara nodded. I'm reopening the case. Something new surfaced. Rachel looked down at the table. She was the first person I ever told a secret to. We used to pretend we were sisters, cut our hands and swore blood oaths. Mara reached into her folder. She didn't pull out the photo yet. Just let the name linger. Do you remember picture day? She asked. Rachel nodded slowly. She didn't want to go. Said she had a bad feeling. Called it creepy face day. I thought she was being silly. Emily could be dramatic sometimes, but she was different that morning. How so? Rachel looked up, eyes sharp now. She said the picture man didn't blink, said he had the wrong kind of camera. I didn't understand what she meant. Wrong how? She said it didn't flash. Said he pointed it at her before she was ready, and the light didn't pop. But he still clicked it, twice. Did she tell anyone else? No. I told her to tell Mrs. Stratton, but she shook her head. She looked scared, like, not just nervous, scared. Like animals scared. She made me promise to stay near her all day. Did you? Rachel's voice cracked. I went to the nurse with a stomachache. I left her alone. She was gone when I came back. Mara finally laid the photo on the table. Rachel stared at it. Her finger reached out to the circled face, the one no one could name. That's him, she whispered. That's the picture man. And her hand began to tremble. The forensics report came in the following Tuesday, printed on crisp, white paper that belied the weight it carried. Mara stood in the hallway outside her office, reading it under the flicker of a dying fluorescent light. The hum above her buzzed in time with her heart. The drifter from the crash had gone unclaimed for over a week. No fingerprints on file, no driver's license, no one looking for him. But the DNA finally gave him a name: David L. Miller. Not a John Doe, not a ghost. He had once been a real man with a social security number, an address in Tacoma, and an employment record that ended abruptly in January of 2000. Lensmark Studios. The connection was instant and sickening. Mara pulled up the personnel file again there. It was, clearer now, D. Miller, assistant, temp. Hired under subcontract for October Photo Week. Vanished from the company's rolls just 3 months later. No termination, no follow-up, just gone. A deeper search into missing persons databases brought up an incident filed in February 2000, reported by a landlord after Miller abandoned his apartment in a hurry. Rent unpaid, furniture still there. Closet half empty. And one other thing. A dark room, hastily dismantled, found in the back of the unit, chemical stains on the floor. Trays of expired developer. A table covered in scraps of trimmed photo paper, some burned. No investigation had followed. No warrants, no searches. Just a quiet conclusion. Tenant skipped town. Except now, Mara knew where he'd gone. Somewhere along the way, he'd started living under overpasses and rotating through shelters. Years in the shadows. Decades, maybe. Until a bend in the road and a slick patch of pavement did what no detective ever had. They had his name now, his past. And his wallet had carried the key to everything Emily's missing photo, cut from a composite, hidden like a secret no one was supposed to find. Mara stared down at his DMV photo. Young, smirking, dark eyes, the kind that didn't blink enough. He'd been 32 when he vanished. He died at 57, alone, wrapped in layers of clothes and mystery. What had he done in the years between? Where had he gone? And most pressing of all, why had he kept her photo for 25 years? The dead man in the ditch wasn't just a clue. He was the beginning. The building was nothing more than a skeleton, now charred beams, reaching like fingers toward a sky that no longer remembered what stood here. The fire had happened nearly 20 years ago, according to the local records. No cause determined, no insurance claim filed. Just an abandoned photo lab in rural Idaho that had gone up in flames one cold January night. Mara stood at the edge of the blackened lot, boots crunching over brittle cinders and broken glass. A handwritten sign still clung to the chain-link fence. Shutter, frame 1, our photo. The irony wasn't lost on her. Nothing about this place had survived an hour, much less 20 years. She hadn't expected to find anything. The tip had come from an old Lensmark employee, a shipping clerk, who remembered that the mysterious assistant David Miller used to send out side work for development to a private lab he claimed was his cousin's. No record of it in company logs, no invoices, just whispers of packages wrapped tight in brown paper, always hand-delivered. The building had collapsed inward during the fire, but the back corner, a developing room, had been partially protected by a cinderblock wall. It was there, crouching in the debris, that Mara's flashlight caught the gleam of metal. A charred file cabinet buckled with heat. She pried it open with a crowbar borrowed from the local hardware store, each drawer screaming in protest. Most of the contents had disintegrated into ash and soot, but the third drawer held a mirror-clean old metal canister, scorched but sealed. Inside, rolled into a tight spiral and wrapped in melted plastic, were several strips of film negatives. She carried them carefully to the rental car, wrapping them in clean cloth and placing them in the passenger seat as though they were fragile glass. She didn't know what they held yet, only that they'd waited here buried, half forgotten, almost erased for 2 decades. Later, back at a forensic photo lab in Spokane, she watched the images come to life under a digital scanner. Blurry, grainy, damaged by heat, but undeniable. Children, girls. Most were posed, standing in front of a generic photo backdrop. Some looked stiff, others looked scared. One, in the second set, wore a red cardigan and a gap-toothed smile. Emily Holt. Mara stared at the screen, heart caught in her throat. The camera hadn't needed a flash, because the room had always been dark. It was the third strip of negative scratched along the edges, warped from heat, that held the image Mara couldn't look away from. It emerged slowly under the scanner's light, frame by frame, until the full image resolved on the monitor in grainy grayscale. There, centered in the middle of the frame, was a girl standing stiffly in front of a background that looked like it belonged to another world entirely. The backdrop was wrong. Not the sky-blue swirl Delridge Elementary had used for over a decade. Not the speckled canvas favored by Lensmark Studios. This was something different, an eerie gray curtain, stained in places, too wrinkled to have been part of any official school shoot. The lighting was uneven, like it came from a single desk lamp. And in the corner of the frame, just barely visible, was a fold-out stool with one broken leg propped up by a block of wood. But it was the girl who froze Mara's blood. She wore a red cardigan, the same red cardigan. Heart-shaped buttons, slightly too long sleeves. Emily Holt had been wearing it the day she disappeared. Her hands were folded in front of her like someone had told her to pose that way. Her hair was combed neatly. Her mouth was closed, no smile, no emotion. And her eyes... Mara leaned closer to the screen. The girl's gaze was vacant, unfocused, as if staring just past the camera. Not afraid, not angry, just gone. As though something inside her had dimmed in the space between the lens and the shutter click. The timestamp on the negative was smudged, but partially legible. 10/14/99. The day of Emily's disappearance. This wasn't a school photo. It wasn't any photo meant to be shared or printed or passed out in glossy envelopes to proud parents. This was documentation. A record. And it had been taken in a place no one ever meant to see. Mara printed the photo, laid it flat on the table beside the others, and stared at it for a long time. The truth was starting to unspool, unraveling the last safe corners of the story everyone in Delridge had tried so hard to bury. Emily had posed for the camera after all. Not at school. Not with her friends. But somewhere else. With someone who never should have been near her. The old case files were stored in a banker's box, yellowed tabs sticking out like the teeth of something long dead. Mara flipped through brittle pages with latex-gloved fingers, each one a relic of missed chances and fading ink. Near the back, stuffed between phone records and interview notes, she found it a thin, crumpled form labeled Community Tip Line, October 1999. The handwriting was neat but rushed, penned in blue ballpoint. It read, "Saw a dark van parked behind the gym, late morning, no plates, didn't belong to staff, man with camera near the east wing entrance, didn't look like school photographer." The name at the bottom, Gerald Lenz, groundskeeper, was unfamiliar. The note had been marked with a red pen, "Follow-up, unnecessary, already covered." In the margin, the original detective had scribbled a quick line, Likely parent, volunteer, or vendor. No students reported contact. Case not relevant. Mara exhaled slowly, pressing the heel of her palm to her forehead. It was the kind of lead that should have opened doors. Instead, it had been shut with a lazy pen stroke and a presumption that nothing sinister could unfold in a town like Delridge. Not behind the school, not in broad daylight. She scanned the report again. No plates. That alone should have triggered further inquiry. But it hadn't. The file moved on, chasing dead ends and redundant interviews, while this detail so small, so easily dismissed sat in a box for 25 years. Mara picked up her phone and tracked down Gerald Lenz. He was still alive, retired in Arizona, voice brittle with age, but sharp with memory. "I remember that day," he said without hesitation. "The van was black, no logos, tinted windows, parked too close to the east side door, where kids weren't even supposed to be." "Did you report it to anyone?" "Yeah. The cops came," I told them. "The detective seemed uninterested. Told me it was probably a delivery or extra photographer help. But I knew every vendor we had back then." "That van didn't belong." Mara stared at the faded report in her lap. "And the man with the camera?" "Didn't see his face, just the shape of him. Pale arms, long coat, moving fast, like he didn't want to be noticed." He had been noticed. Once, briefly. But no one listened. And in that silence, a girl had disappeared. The woman's name was Gloria Madsen. She lived in a rundown duplex on the edge of Red Bluff, a town that blinked past most maps in the space of a breath. Her hair was a coarse halo of frizz, and her hands trembled when she lit her cigarette, not from fear, Mara thought, but from the weight of things unsaid for too long. They sat in her narrow living room, the TV buzzing white noise in the background, a ceramic angel leaning askew on the mantel. Gloria didn't ask what brought Mara there. She already knew. "You said you lived with him?" Mara asked, notebook balanced on her knee. Gloria took a long drag and exhaled slow. "He wasn't called Miller when I knew him. Said his name was Jay. Just Jay. He was quiet, polite. Weird, though. Real particular about his routines. Labeled everything. Folded socks like soldiers." "And when was this?" "99. Maybe into 2000. A few months. We shared rent. I thought it was just one of those thing-stow people who didn't want to be alone." Mara waited. Gloria's gaze drifted to the corner of the room, where a patched recliner sagged under the weight of old blankets. "He kept a shoebox under his bed, never let me touch it, said it was private work. I peeked once while he was at the store, couldn't help it." "What was in it?" Her voice lowered. "Photos. Dozens of them. All of girls. Young. Some looked posed, like school pictures. Others were different. Candid. Some sleeping. Some looking straight into the lens. It felt wrong, like they weren't supposed to be seen." "Did you recognize any of the girls?" "No. But one of them wore a red sweater with little heart buttons. That one I remember. It stuck with me." "Emily. Why didn't you report it?" Mara asked gently. Gloria stubbed out her cigarette. "He scared me. Not with threats, just the way he was. Still, controlled. Like if you pressed the wrong button, something awful would click into motion." "Do you know where he went?" "Disappeared overnight. Didn't leave a note. Took the shoebox but left clothes behind. I called the landlord. Told myself it was better not to get involved." Gloria looked down at her hands. "But I've thought about those photos every year since." And now, one of those faces had come back from the box. Not in memory, but in evidence. A girl the world had forgotten. But he never had. The images arrived one by one, projected onto the sterile white of the forensic lab's wall, each accompanied by a silence that seemed to deepen with every frame. Mara stood with her arms crossed, jaw locked, as the technician clicked through the digitized negatives. It was like watching time collapse in slow-motion children, each caught mid-blink or mid-breath, frozen forever in cheap lighting and uneven focus. It wasn't just Emily. There were others. Girls of varying ages, some no older than 5 or 6, others entering adolescence. Each photo carried the same signature-style homemade backdrop, No flash, subjects posed with rigid hands and glazed eyes. Most were dressed plainly, as if chosen from thrift store racks, ill-fitting cardigans, oversized shoes, collars askew. Some images were duplicated, like he couldn't decide which one mattered more. Others showed clear signs of movement, as if the subject had flinched or tried to step away. One girl's eyes were red and puffy. Another had her arms crossed tight against her chest, mouth pulled into a line so flat it seemed carved there. Mara leaned in, as the technician paused on a photo that chilled the room. "This one," she murmured. "Enhance it." The girl in the image had dark curly hair and a chipped tooth. Her name, Mara would learn later, was Brielle Stone. She had gone missing from a rest stop in Kansas in 2001. Her case file had sat untouched for nearly 2 decades, listed under probable runaway. Another slide. A pale girl with a cleft chin and mismatched socks, Natalie Cho, last seen in Oregon, 2003. And then another? And another? The map began to build itself. Washington, Idaho, Kansas, Montana, Missouri. Each girl disappeared within days of a school photo day, or during travel near rural photo labs, or under the pretense of a temporary guardian or uncle no one had ever truly vetted. It was a pattern that no one had connected, until now. He hadn't just taken Emily. He had taken others. They were faces buried in local obituaries, in unsolved folders, in the quiet corners of forgotten towns. Each one had been photographed with the same cold lens, the same sick precision. He hadn't just been documenting them, he'd been collecting them. And across state lines, he'd left no fingerprints. Just film and faces. The frame came up unexpectedly tucked at the end of a reel damaged by smoke and heat, almost skipped over entirely. The technician stopped only because of a flicker, something in the corner, an eye, a hint of red. Mara stepped closer, heart caught mid-beat. The photo was blurred at the edges, the lens clearly out of focus, or maybe moved mid-click. But there she was. Emily. Older. Her features were unmistakable, though softened by time. The face no longer round with baby fat. Her jaw more defined, her eyes shadowed with something Mara could only describe as distance. She was maybe 12, possibly 13, dressed in a yellow sweatshirt, the kind sold in bulk at chain department stores, and jeans rolled at the ankle. She wasn't smiling. Her mouth was slightly open, as if caught mid-sentence, or breath, or plea. One hand was half raised, as though she'd been about to block the lens. The background wasn't the curtain anymore. This wasn't the same setup as before. It looked like a basement, unfinished walls, visible piping, and in the corner, a fold-out chair. A battered table with paper cups and a single bare light bulb hanging from a chain overhead. "Zoom in," Mara said. Her voice came out hoarse. The technician enhanced the image, pixelation blooming at the edges. Still, it was enough. Emily's hair was longer now. Her cardigan was gone. Her expression was different. Less vacant than the last photo, but not quite alive. "What is this?" Mara whispered, not expecting an answer. The timestamp on the file own of the few still legible read, 6/12/3. 4 years after Emily disappeared. Mara stepped back from the screen, breath catching in her chest. She had never allowed herself to believe Emily had survived beyond that day at the school. The red cardigan. The empty square in the class photo. It had all felt like a final punctuation mark. But now, this. Not a memory. Not a ghost. Evidence. The girl who had vanished in the hallway of Delridge Elementary had lived long enough to grow older, to be moved, to be dressed in someone else's clothes, and made to stand in front of someone else's camera. And she had looked into the lens. Not with fear, but with recognition. As if she knew, even then, that one day someone might see her again. The road to the cabin wasn't paved. It wound like a scar through the mountains, narrowing as it climbed into a mist that clung to the treetops like breath held too long. Mara's tires crunched over gravel and patches of half-frozen earth, the radio silent, her phone long since lost to signal. She'd followed the paper trail from a tip that almost didn't feel real, an old property lease, handwritten and water-damaged, tucked inside a forgotten folder at a rural post office. The name on the lease wasn't David Miller, but James Denton, another alias used on a string of motel check-ins and storage units. But this place was different. It was permanent. The cabin came into view like something conjured, hidden behind a wall of pines. It was small, its wood darkened by weather, roof sagging slightly on one side. The windows were shuttered, though one had cracked, letting the wind whistle low and constant. Mara stepped out of the car, her boots sinking into soft ground. There was no mailbox, no sign, no welcome mat. Just a rusted chain lock dangling from the front door snapped open, as if someone had left in a hurry. Inside, the air was dry and stale. Dust coated every surface, and the smell of old wood and mildew hung thick. A twin mattress sat on the floor, covered in a plaid blanket that hadn't been washed in years. In the corner, a battered desk with drawers half open, loose pages spilling onto the floor. And then the wall. Photos. Dozens of them, curled at the edges, thumbtacked in uneven rows. Most were printed from old negatives, the kind developed in dark rooms. Children's faces. Some familiar from the scanned film reels, others entirely new, but it was the center photo that made Mara freeze. Emily. Younger again, maybe 11, hair messy. Her eyes cast sideways toward something just outside the frame. A bruise bloomed faintly on her jaw, nearly the color of fading ink. Mara stepped closer. Behind the photo, taped to the wall, was a map. Pins connected with red thread, towns, dates, circles drawn around elementary schools. She didn't know what chilled her more, that he'd kept these records so obsessively, or that no one had ever thought to look for them. He hadn't just taken girls. He had planned for them. This place wasn't a hideout. It was a hunting lodge. The cellar door was hidden beneath a loose board in the floor, partially covered by an old rug that had rotted at the edges. Mara had almost missed it. The ring latch was rusted, the wood swollen from decades of damp mountain air, but when she pulled it open, a cold gust of earth and mildew breathed up from below. She descended the narrow stairs slowly, flashlight cutting through the dark. The air grew colder with each step, damp and metallic, the kind of cold that seeped into bones and memory. At the bottom, the beam of light caught shelves, dozens of them. Crude wooden planks nailed into stone walls, every inch of space used. Polaroids, hundreds of them. Some had curled from humidity, others were stuck together in clumps. Mara's gloved hands trembled as she lifted the first few faces of children, some looking directly at the lens, others caught in motion, mid-turn, mid-cry. Each labeled on the back in careful handwriting, MP, age 8, KL, 2001, subject 4, compliant. She moved deeper into the cellar and found a plastic storage bin, its lid taped shut. Inside were stacks of paper crayon drawings, on lined notebook paper, childish scrawls of houses and trees and figures with long arms. Many were signed Emily H. One drawing stood out. It showed a red building, a swing set, and a girl with a red sweater standing beside a tall figure. The girl's mouth was a straight line. The man had no face. Beneath the drawings, wrapped in an old t-shirt, was a diary, a small pink hardcover with peeling corners and a unicorn faded nearly to white, a lock hung broken on the side. Mara sat on a dusty stool and opened it. The first entries were innocent school crushes, favorite books, notes about her cat and her best friend Rachel. The handwriting was round and untroubled. Then the tone changed. He says I can't use my name anymore. The picture man gets angry when I ask about going home. He made me smile today, said I did good, but I didn't feel good. Years passed in the pages. Her writing grew sharper, angrier, more desperate. The last entry, dated June 2004, read, "If someone finds this, please, remember me. I was here. I didn't forget who I am. Please, tell my mom I tried to be brave." Mara closed the diary with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Emily had survived in this darkness, and she had left behind a voice No one silenced. Mara didn't move for a long time after reading the final entry. The cellar, cold and dim, seemed to close in around her, the weight of years pressing from every direction. Dust hung motionless in the beam of her flashlight, and somewhere above her the house creaked under its own memory. But down here it was Emily's voice that filled the space. Not in cries or whispers but in handwriting, neat and brave, scrawled onto the last page of a pink diary worn soft from time. "If you find this, please tell my mom I didn't stop trying to come home." The words were written in pencil, faint in places where the lead had dulled or her hand had trembled. But they were steady. No crossed-out lines, no hesitation. Just one clear thought, carved like a message into stone. Emily hadn't written it for herself. She'd written it for someone like Mara Somione who might come after, someone who could carry what she never got to say. Mara turned the book over in her hands, slowly, reverently, like something sacred. The other entries, hundreds of them, tracked birthdays missed, nightmares endured, moments when hope flickered and nearly went out. But not this one. This last page was quiet, direct, not angry, not even afraid. Just full of love. It was a message to a mother who'd waited by a window for 25 years, hoping for a knock that never came. A woman who had kept Emily's room exactly as it was, who had packed away school clothes without washing them, afraid to lose the scent. A mother who'd begged the world not to forget her child, even when the world begged her to move on. Mara stood, brushing dust from her pants, tucking the diary carefully into a forensic bag. She took one last look at the drawing pinned beside the shelves, Emily's red sweater, the faceless man, the silent plea drawn in colors that had long since faded. And then she climbed the stairs, her flashlight trailing shadows across the walls. She emerged into gray daylight, the air sharp in her lungs. The trees rustled around the cabin like they too had been holding their breath. Emily Holt had spoken. Finally. And Mara would make sure the world listened. They found her just after dawn, when the frost still clung to the blades of grass like breath holding tight to the earth. A forensic team had begun a grid search of the clearing behind the cabin, working in silence, shovels moving slow and deliberate through the hardened soil. It was one of the dogs that stopped first, a German shepherd trained for cadaver detection, its body going stiff, tail locked, nose pointed toward a moss-covered dip in the ground, no bigger than a shallow divot. Mara watched from a distance, arms crossed, jaw set. She didn't move until one of the techs signaled her over with a quiet nod, the kind that carried too much weight to speak aloud. The grave was less than 2 feet deep, covered with a thin layer of rocks and branches, as if someone had tried to mimic nature's randomness. But the pattern was too tidy, intentional. They uncovered her slowly, carefully. Bones. Scraps of fabric yellow cotton, the same sweatshirt Emily wore in the blurred photo found among the negatives. A piece of a plastic hair clip, the kind sold in packs of 10 at gas station counters. One shoe. And then, near the shoulder, a sliver of fabric that made Mara's breath catch in her throat. Red, faded nearly to brown, but unmistakable. A heart-shaped button still clung to the edge. The cardigan. It was hers. The remains were fragile, brittle from time and exposure, but there was enough for a sample, enough for an answer, and 3 days later, the lab confirmed what Mara already knew. It was Emily. Older, taller, but still her. Still, the girl who wore the red sweater and worried about her missing front tooth. Still, the child who had stood quietly in the hallway outside her classroom, waiting for her turn in front of the camera, not knowing she would never return. She had lived for years in captivity. She had written, drawn, hoped, remembered, and now she had been found. Mara knelt beside the grave, hand pressed to the earth, and whispered the only thing she could think to say. "You can go home now, Emily." Because finally, she could. The chapel was small and sunlit, tucked behind an old grove of trees just outside Delridge, where the wind moved gently through the evergreens as if even the forest had grown quiet to listen. Rows of chairs had been arranged in careful symmetry, white roses tied to the ends, with ribbons the color of dusk. A simple urn rested on a table draped in linen, surrounded by candles that flickered even without breeze, each one reflecting off the glass of a frame propped beside her. The class photo. Only this time, it wasn't the one Mara had found in the drifter's wallet, scarred by ink and a missing square. This version had been painstakingly restored. Emily's image, reconstructed from the old negatives and cleaned of blur, had been placed back into the empty space. Her face sat between two classmates who had gone on to graduate, marry, raise children of their own. A little girl in a red cardigan, with a shy smile and eyes that didn't yet know what would come next. And finally, she was there. Whole. Seen. Mara stood at the back, away from the rows of family and townsfolk. She watched Sarah Holt approach the urn, moving slowly, arms trembling just enough to betray the storm underneath. She held the photo in her hands for a long time before placing it beside her daughter's ashes. It was the one thing Emily had never gotten that day. Her turn in front of the camera. Now, finally, she had it. Rachel came forward next, her hair pulled back, lips pressed into a thin, determined line. She laid a drawing beside the photo, one of the crayon sketches Mara had found in the cellar. A house, a cat, a girl smiling in the sun. It was crude and childlike and utterly perfect. A minister spoke softly about grief and time, about how a life isn't measured only in years lived, but in the love left behind, in the voices still speaking after silence. Mara didn't catch every word. Her eyes were on the photo, that one small square filled after 25 years of emptiness. Emily Holt had been taken. But now, she was given back. And in the hush that followed the final prayer, it felt for just a moment like the town of Delridge was breathing again, like something had been lifted. Like a picture, finally whole.